Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Millennials Are Killing Capitalism Live. This one totally unplanned. Saw an article this morning, read it all. I know that a lot of people don't read. Um, Shout out to Hiram. Don't read articles in their entirety. I rarely do, to be honest with you. I mean, I kind of skim a lot of stuff. But this one's really important for a number of reasons. Um, so let me say a couple things up front. I mean, first of all, it comes out from the Washington Post, which is one of the major counterinsurgency organs of U.S. imperialism. It is not a reliable media outlet. It is not an outlet that any of us should privilege in trying to understand our world because of its interests, right? I mean, it's obviously in DC, close to the heart or right at the heart of US empire. It has a long history. Jeff Bezos is currently the owner of it. Um, yeah, I mean, up there with New York Times, right, which we Josh recently released the audio podcast with the New York war crimes folks. Shout out to them, exposing the long history of the New York Times complicity in imperialism, and Washington Post is right up there with that, right? So just want to say that up front. The other thing about papers like this, though, is that they do have resources for reporting, which is something that's often lacking in other, like certainly local media, certainly independent media, like media, revolutionary media, having the resources to be able to pay people to do investigative work, which takes money, it takes time, it takes dedication. Most newspapers are on cycles where they're just trying to constantly churn out. I had a close friend of mine passed away several years ago, Felix Garcia, who I credit often as kind of, you know, his untimely passing leading me to be interested in getting more involved in media work. And like he worked for the Independent, which is a UK paper, but they're US based outlet. And he had to do like 3 articles a day. It was terrible, and he hated it, right? He was on the Trump beat and he had to just constantly write articles about Trump, right? What's going on with Trump? What's going on with the MAGA folks? Like this was his beat. And, had to report on a lot of really silly, kind of meaningless stuff just to, please the newspaper's desire for productivity, to get articles out, to get ad revenue, to get clicks, et cetera, right? So setting all of that aside, point being, Washington Post does have resources. Another thing that I want to caution on this is that this piece, it's kind of funny what it's doing, right? Because on one level, uh, it's saying that there's a WhatsApp group, and I'll go through. I'm going to read a lot of it aloud, maybe all of it. A WhatsApp group of 100 um, prominent billionaires, right, and millionaires. Many of them, at least the ones that it cites, right, are Israeli or are Jewish, right? And even in it, as you'll see, like there are moments where the people sort of say, "Hey, talking about a WhatsApp group with all of these prominent Jews sounds like a conspiracy theory, right?" Um, and so I think we can go through and we can talk about what it's doing and what's revealed through the reporting, which I think is very significant. But I also just want to note that I think the article, in part, what it does is seek to displace, right, some of the counterinsurgency, some of the pro-Israeli Zionist sentiment from, if we think back to recent conversation with Max Isle, right, from the material underpinnings of U.S. imperialism and Zionism as a state project that our government is 100% invested in, that our ruling class is 100% invested in, right? And make it seem like it's 100, Zionists and billionaires in a WhatsApp group. Um, Nonetheless, what goes on within the WhatsApp group is really, really interesting. So before I get to that, I'm just going to remind folks, first of all, do the things, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Hello to the folks, in the chat that are watching live. Um, Support us on Patreon if you don't already. Um, but before I do that, I do want to revisit just one quick section of the counterinsurgency field manual because I think that it will help us as we think about what we're reading here today. All right. All right. So this is from Joint Publication 3-24, otherwise known as the U.S. Army Counterinsurgency Field Manual, originally developed by the Marines and the U.S. military with support from the human rights apparatus, academia, media, right, so on. You can go check out the conversation Counterinsurgency 101 with Dylan Rodriguez, where we talk about some of that, right? Um, so, coin narrative. Coin stands for counterinsurgency. Coin planners should compose a unifying message, the coin narrative, that is consistent with the overarching United States government narrative, which is coupled to the United States government objective. Narrative is a structure of planned themes from which both messages and actions are developed. Narrative provides a common thread of communicative influence. The objective speaks to the desired outcome. Narrative communicates the story of how and why of an operation. Common themes within a counterinsurgency narrative may be reinforcing the credibility and perception of the legitimacy of the home nation, which in this case would be Israel, and the U.S. government counterinsurgency operation, exploiting the negative aspects of the insurgent efforts preemptively presenting the expected insurgent argument along with counter arguments. The coin narrative is built on strategic themes that coincide with operational objectives. Messages and actions are planned to set the conditions for or to reinforce the coin objective and narrative. In the end calculus, both operations and narrative should be mutually supporting and directed at the realization of the coin operations objectives. Narrative provides the guidance from which supporting themes are developed, followed by actions and messages. Source credibility is a planning consideration when implementing influence actions and messages consistent with the counterinsurgency narrative. Perceptions and bias in the information environment may decrease the source credibility of government forces or agencies. It is vital for counterinsurgents to assess, promote, and exploit the differences between accepted home nation cultural norms and the insurgency narrative and associated adversary information efforts. The counterinsurgency narrative should be the result of meticulous target audience analysis conducted by cultural and language subject matter experts in close coordination among the home nation government, GCC and JFC. I forget those acronyms, but anyways, basically to say that there's always within counterinsurgency, there's a lot of coordination across different sectors. Joint JFC is like Joint Force Command or something like that. Um, the coin narrative should provide the guidance from which themes, actions, and messages can be planned in support of the coin objectives. Finally, when faced with more than one significant insurgency narrative, those developed by indigenous insurgents, by transnational terrorists, and by major criminal enterprise, more than one supporting counterinsurgency narrative may be required. Truthful public communication aids in maintaining legitimacy through the rapid dissemination of accurate information. So that's that piece. I just wanted to say that up front to remind folks what how narrative fits within counterinsurgency. There's other pieces within the manual where it talks about counterinsurgency as a war by all these different means, and narrative being a key one, as well as psychological operations, right? Which is something that we talk a lot about with Lara Shihai. All right, now I'm going to get to the article. Just see. Good morning, everybody. All right. Okay. So here we go. So to start, business titans privately urged New York City mayor to use police on Columbia protesters chats show. A WhatsApp chat started by some wealthy Americans after October 7th Hamas attacks reveals their focus on Mayor Eric Adams and their work to shape US opinion on the Gaza war. I wanna say at the start, like, I do think the part about Eric Adams is interesting. Again, I kind of find it interesting that the story just sort of, like, that would be the headline, because to me, it's not the most important aspect of the story at all. But, again, like, maybe he's a convenient sort of fall guy, but, obviously, his actions are kind of hilarious at some points in this, but, anyway, so a group of billionaires, let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. All right, that looks better. Okay. A group of billionaires and business titans working to shape US public opinion on the war in Gaza privately pressed New York City's mayor last month to send police to disperse pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia University, according to communications obtained by the Washington Post and people familiar with the group. Business executives, including Kind, this is Kind, like Kind bars, right? Kind snack company founder Daniel Lubetsky, hedge fund manager Daniel Loeb, billionaire Len Blavacnik, and real estate investor Joshua Sitt held a Zoom video call on April 26th with Mayor Eric Adams about a week after the mayor first sent New York police to Columbia campus, a log of chat messages shows. During the call, some attendees discussed making political donations to Adams, as well as how the chat group's members could pressure Columbia's president and trustees to permit the mayor to send police to campus to handle protesters, according to chat messages summarizing the conversation. One member of the WhatsApp chat group told the Post he donated $22,100, the maximum legal limit, to Adams that month. Some members also offered to pay for private investigators to assist New York police in handling the protests, the chat log shows. An offer a member of the group reported in the chat that Adams accepted. The New York Police Department is not using and has not used private investigators to help manage protests, a spokeswoman for City Hall, that's New York City Hall, said. Messages describing the call with Adams were among thousands logged in a WhatsApp chat among some of the nation's most prominent business leaders and financiers, including former CEO of Starbucks, Howard Schultz, Dell founder and CEO Michael Dell, hedge fund manager Bill Ackman. Ackman, of course, was also, along with Jessica Seinfeld, Jerry Seinfeld's wife, responsible for setting up and funding the I hate using the term counter protest, the fascist insurgency against the UCLA protests, right? As we've kind of previously talked about. Um, and Joshua Kramer, founder of Thrive Capital and brother to Joshua Kushner. Um, Jared Kushner, of course, is former President Donald Trump's son-in-law. People with direct access to the chat logs content supplied them to the Post. They shared the information on the condition of anonymity because the chat contents are meant to stay private. Members of the group verified the chat's existence and their comments. The chat was initiated by a staffer for billionaire and real estate magnate Barry Sternlicht, who never directly joined. Smart guy. Instead, communicating through the staffer, according to chat messages and a person close to Sternlicht. In an October 12th message, one of the first in the group, the staffer posting on behalf of Sternlicht told others the goal of the group was to change the narrative in favor of Israel, partly by conveying the atrocities committed by Hamas to all Americans. Israel estimates 1,200 people were killed. I actually like that they say Israel estimates, right? Because that number is, there's no reason to necessarily believe that number, especially with all the friendly fire reporting and everything else. Israel estimates 1,200 people were killed in Hamas's October 7th attack. In the months since the war began, the death toll in Gaza has risen above 35,000, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. The chat group formed shortly after the October 7th attack, and its activism has stretched beyond New York, touching the highest levels of the Israeli government, the U.S. business world, and elite universities. Titled Israel Current Events, the chat expanded to about 100 members, the chat log shows. More than a dozen members of the group appear on Forbes' annual list of billionaires. Others work in real estate, finance, and communications. That's fascinating. I mean, just on its own, like more than a dozen billionaires, um, real estate folks, and then the people in finance, obviously, investing these people's money and whatnot. But communications, right? You have all these people there, presumably PR experts, working with these folks, or retained by these folks, for the purposes of helping them to develop propaganda. Overall, the messages offer a window into how some prominent individuals have wielded their money and power in an effort to shape American views on the Gaza war, as well as the actions of academic, business, and political leaders, including New York's mayor. He's open to any ideas we have, chat member Sit, founder of retail chain Ashley Stewart and the global real estate company Thor Equities, wrote on April 27th, the day after the group's Zoom call with Adams. That's Eric Adams. As you saw, he's okay if we hire private investigators to then have his police force intel team work with them. Sit declined to comment through a spokeswoman. Gosh, I wonder why. Um, a half dozen prominent members of the group confirmed on the record their participation in the chat. Multiple people familiar with the group confirmed the names of other members. Cypriot Israeli real estate billionaire Yakir Gabay, a chat member, wrote in a statement shared by a spokesperson that he joined the group because he wanted to, quote, share support at a difficult and painful time, end quote, to aid the victims of Hamas attacks and to, quote, try and correct the false and misleading information intentionally spread worldwide to deny or cover up the suffering caused by Hamas, end quote. Yeah, that's the real problem, right? Is that there's some massive network spreading misinformation worldwide. Hmm. Um, Asked about the Zoom meeting with chat group members, the mayor's office did not address it directly, instead sharing a statement from Deputy Mayor Fabian Levy, noting that New York police entered Columbia's campus twice in response to, quote, specific written requests, end quote, from university leadership. It's interesting. We get to that later. Quote, any suggestion that other considerations were involved in the decision-making process is completely false, end quote, Levy said. He added, quote, the insinuation that Jewish donors secretly plotted to influence government operations is an all too familiar anti-Semitic trope that the Washington Post should be ashamed to ask about, let alone normalize in print, end quote. I mean, this is what I said at front, and it is an interesting thing that the Washington Post would report this because these are very powerful folks that they're reporting on. Um, and obviously members very much of the US ruling class. So I do think there is this thing about pinning it on this group. However, that can't be used to negate the existence of the group or the activities of the group, which are here reported quite openly, which members of the group acknowledge, right? So, um, yeah, I mean, obviously, this is an attempt by the city of New York to discredit this article. Anyway, fascinating. Adams demonstrated a willingness to send law enforcement to deal with campus protesters from the beginning. He sent police to Columbia's campus to disperse pro Palestinian demonstrators on April 18th at the university's request. About a day after protesters erected their Gaza solidarity encampment, officers arrested more than 100 protesters. The mayor subsequently alleged students were affected by, quote, outside influences, end quote, and the police intervention was needed to prevent children from being radicalized. Both he and Colombia's president have since strong criticism, but also support for involving police, adding to a fraught stretch for Adams, who is up for re-election in 2025 and faces an FBI corruption investigation into whether his 2021 campaign received illegal donations from Turkey. Adams has defended that campaign, saying he held it to, quote, the highest ethical standards, end quote. 4 days after chat members held the video call with Adams, student protesters occupied a building, and campus president invited police back to campus to clear the building. This is Hins Hall. Officers removed and arrested dozens of protesters, pushing, striking, and dragging students in the process. The Post reported one officer accidentally fired his gun. Months before protests at Columbia this spring, some chat members attended private briefings with former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, Benny Gantz, and a member of the Israeli War Cabinet. Sorry, Benny Gantz, who is a member of the Israeli War Cabinet, and Israel's ambassador to the United States, Michael Herzog, according to chat records. So again, like this group of people within this chat is holding private meetings with the former Israeli Prime Minister Benny Gantz, who's one of the far right, um, pro settler, extreme right. I mean, we could talk about the differences within Zionism, but anyways, member of the Israeli War Cabinet, and then Michael Herzog, who's an ambassador from Israel to the U.S. Members of the group also worked with the Israeli government to screen a roughly 40-minute film showing footage compiled by the IDF, the IOF, titled, quote, Bearing Witness to the October 7th Massacre, to audiences in New York City. The film portrays killings committed by Hamas. A chat member asked for help from other members to show the film at universities. It was later screened at Harvard. A showing chat member, Ackman, helped facilitate, attended, and promoted publicly. Right? So everybody's seen this, they do these screenings, especially in places like major universities, New York City. I think there was one in Los Angeles as well, right? And then you rile up these Zionists and you get celebrities to come, hopefully, although not a lot of them have attended, right? But you know, coordinating directly with the IOF here to do this. Sternlicht declined to comment on the record, although a person close to him, speaking on the condition of anonymity because he was not authorized to discuss the chat group publicly, confirmed the real estate tycoon initiated the chat. So this is Sternlicht. He started the chat, right? Other members of the chat, including Ackman and Schultz, that's Howard Schultz, Starbucks dude, confirmed their membership. The spokesman said Ackman had not participated in the chat since January 10th. That's very convenient, adding Ackman never spoke to Adams about the Columbia protests or donated to Adams' campaign, although Ackman, quote, likes and is supportive of the mayor, end quote. Joshua Kushner, again, Jared Kushner's brother, so, Trump's nephew-in-law, declined to comment. On October 12th, a staffer for Sternlicht relayed a message from his boss outlining the group's mission, While Israel worked to, quote, win the physical war, the chat members group would, quote, win the war, end quote, of U.S. public opinion by funding an information campaign against Hamas. See, this is the lead right here. Like, why is this so far down? And like, anyway, that's the lead for me, right? Is the idea that again, a Sternlich staffer, so the people who created it, uh, you know, the purpose of this was to win the war and to win it, an information war, right? The news site Semaphore reported in November that Sternlich was launching a $50 million anti-Hamas media campaign with various Wall Street and Hollywood billionaires. The people involved, per Semaphore's reporting, include some members of the WhatsApp chat, a review by the Post found. The chat messages, the contents of which have never before been reported, appear to reveal the start of the campaign as well as separate pro-Israel activities undertaken by chat members. It is unclear to what extent the chat group and media campaign overlapped. Some of the media campaign's activities were public, including its website, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, and X accounts, which together attracted more than 170,000 followers. I haven't gone into looking at the media campaign in detail. 170,000 followers across all of those platforms is not necessarily a whole lot, but nonetheless, I don't think that's a good indication of the overall influence of a media campaign like that, because a lot of it is probably funding the creation of certain articles and then seeking to get them placed. That would be my guess, right? Um, High level context, private briefings. At a moment of rising anti Semitism, the staffer for Sternlich wrote in one of the first chat messages that his boss was proud of his Jewish heritage and wanted to support Israel, but was also concerned about security. Anonymity, the staffer wrote on October 12th on Sternlich's behalf, quote, is a practical need and a concern for safety of my family in an increasingly complex world, end quote. The staffer wrote that Sternlich understood that if other members felt similarly and promised that all contributions to the media campaign would remain anonymous, quote, I'm sensitive to concerns about being less effective if it appears that this is a Jewish initiative, end quote, the staffer wrote, speaking for Sternlich. From the start of the chat, members sought guidance and information from officials in the Israeli government. Some of the WhatsApp chat members said in the chat they attended private briefings about the Gaza war with Israeli War Cabinet member Gantz, former Prime Minister Bennett, that's Naftali Bennett, and Herzog, the ambassador. The chat logs show invites for these meetings. Most appreciative, this is a quote, most appreciative for the behind the scenes briefing by Naftali Bennett. Howard Schultz, former CEO of Starbucks, wrote to the group on October 16th, quite extraordinary. That's hilarious. Bennett did not comment to a request for comment. Gantz could not be reached for comment. A spokesperson for the Israeli embassy in Washington said the briefing Herzog gave chat members was, quote, one of dozens, end quote, the ambassador delivered that month, adding that, quote, communities here in the U.S. understandably wanted to learn more about what was happening on the ground in Israel, end quote. Yeah, so who better to ask than the Israeli ambassador, right? Such a reliable source. A spokesperson for Schultz confirmed in a statement that he attended the briefing with Bennett, but said Schultz, quote, did not participate in or contribute financially to any of the group's work, end quote. Schultz was neither involved in discussions about Adams and the Columbia protests nor screenings of the film, according to a spokesman. I just say, like, somebody like Howard Schultz and like the smarter billionaires here, like they have a lot of ways to contribute that wouldn't be direct and wouldn't be like immediately traced back to them, whether it's foundations that they give to and asking them to contribute and so on and so forth. So we certainly won't, we certainly can't take them at their word on these things, but also, that a lot of these people are clearly not smart enough to stay out of a WhatsApp chat group like this, but smart enough to seek ways to conceal any financial donations that they're giving or make it to where they can't be discovered for until years after the fact at best. Um, in late October, the chat records show chat members appear to have suggested to Israeli officials that they should hold a private New York City screening for media of, quote, bearing witness, right? The IDF film featuring graphic footage recorded by Hamas gunmen on body cameras and cell phones as they attacked Israel. The framing of this is ridiculous. But, anyways, SIT wrote in a message to the group on October 27th that Israeli officials wanted to thank them for, quote, coming up with the concept of the press event in NYC, end quote. The next month, the group showed the film in New York. Records show SIT wrote on November 10th that the Israeli government arranged for us to screen the film in Gotham Hall on November 17th, adding in a later message, the showing will, quote, be listed as an IDF event not affiliated to Facts for Peace to keep them separate, end quote, right? So I haven't looked into Facts for Peace, but presumably this is one of these astroturfed organs that they propped up to be able to dispel this, to disseminate this propaganda, right? So he's just saying we're going to try to keep this separate and just say this is just an IOF event, right? In ensuing months, group members wrote in the chat to flag news articles or social media posts about Israel, events in Gaza, or later campus college protests. So they're monitoring, the news that's going on related to all of these things, obviously to figure out how to spin things, how to respond to things. We could think back to that coin thing up front about you want to be able to create counterinsurgency narratives to respond to insurgency narratives often before they even are developed, right? Um, so NYPD can return. So this is another section of the piece. So Columbia students first set up an encampment April 17th, eventually leading some Jewish students to allege the protests had forged a hostile and harassing atmosphere, some Zionist students. Police stepped in to clear the encampment at the Columbia president's request on April 18th, arresting more than 100 demonstrators. In the chat, discussion of how Adams was handling the Columbia protests and how group members could help took off the following day after student protesters built a new encampment to replace the demolished one. So again, like just to clarify what's going on here, the encampment was broken, right? And then of course more students came back, even more, right, after they dismantled the original one. And this group is like figuring out how do we stop this? How do we break this up? Lubetsky of the snack company Kind posted in the chat sharing a link to an Instagram video showing an Israeli Arab journalist getting hit by a man. The video caption claims is a, quote, anti-Israel protester. I remember when that happened, right? This was again, the right wing was trying to show, oh, look how violent these protests are, right? And trying to fan the flames of this. Not long after, billionaire Blavatnik posted a picture of Adams and wrote, quote, he needs help. SIT responded that he had already, quote, been giving help, but can use more support, end quote. He asked if others were, quote, open to giving, end quote, to Adams. Gabay, the Cypriot Israeli real estate billionaire, replied, please send the info. Thanks. Then Blavatnik posted an Act Blue link allowing donations to the Eric Adams 2025 committee. Lubetsky messaged, quote, if there is a group to contribute through or a way to ensure our contributions are known to be related to his efforts to fight anti-Semitism and hate, Please let us know and I will support meaningfully alongside you guys, end quote. Sit replied that he was arranging, quote, a code for such donations. Asked about this message, Vito Pitta, counsel to Adams' 2025 campaign, said, quote, there is no special code for contributions, end quote. A spokeswoman for Blavatnik said he contributed 2,100 to Adams' reelection campaign. Again, 2,100 is the maximum that an individual can give. She said the donation was given, quote, to endorse Mayor Adams' stalwart support of Israel and firm stand against anti-Semitism, end quote. Spokespeople for Lubetsky, Sit, and Gabay said they did not donate to Adams. Loeb declined to comment. In the chat, discussion turned to the fact that Columbia had to grant Adams permission before he could send city police to the campus. This is an important point, right? Columbia had to give Adams permission. One member asked if the group could do anything to pressure Columbia trustees to cooperate with the mayor. In reply, former Congressman Ted Deutsch, we had a conversation with Matt Deitch years ago where he talked about Ted Deutsch, CEO of the American Jewish Committee, shared a PDF of a letter his organization had sent that day to Colombia President Manouche Shafik, calling on her to, quote, shut these protests down, end quote. Also in touch with the board, Deutsch wrote to the chat group, so NYPD can return. Asked for comment, a spokeswoman for Deutsch wrote in an email to the Post that the American Jewish Committee, quote, values all opportunities to engage with various individuals and institutions who support the Jewish people and the state of Israel, end quote. Asked about the chat group and its activities, a Columbia spokesperson wrote, quote, we have no knowledge of this, end quote. A Zoom video call with chat group members and Adams took place a little after 11 a.m. on April 26, according to chat records. It is unclear how many members attended this meeting, which lasted for roughly 45 minutes, chat records show. Those present included at least Blavatnik, Sit, Loeb, and Lubetsky, according to the chat logs. Sit wrote minutes after the call ended to summarize items, quote, discussed today, end quote, including donating to Adams, using group members' leverage to help persuade Columbia's president to let New York police back on campus, and paying for, quote, investigative efforts, end quote, to assist the city. Lubetsky replied, listing concrete actions group members should take. These included resharing a link to offer financial support to Adams, calling and writing to Columbia's president and board of trustees, and this is interesting, quote, getting Black leaders to condemn anti-Semitism, end quote. He named several people he would contact and asked if anyone in the group knew Jay-Z, LeBron James, or Alicia Keys. There's also, I'd say, in the lobby, if folks go back to that film, there was a big concern in it about losing younger generations. Israel being concerned about younger generations being pro-Palestinian. This was, probably 6-7 years ago. And one of their big initiatives, right, was to increase the level of support for Zionism among Black celebrities. Asked about his comments, Lubetsky wrote in a statement to the Post that, quote, building bridges between the Black and Jewish communities is more important than ever, end quote. Blavatnik, through a spokeswoman, confirmed that he attended the Zoom with Adams, but said he did not, quote, participate in a conversation about private investigators and is unaware of discussions related to that subject, end quote. Remember, they talked about it in the chat, so he's not unaware of it. The spokeswoman noted other people on the Zoom said things Blavatnik, quote, did not weigh in on or agree with, end quote. Said the billionaire, a Columbia alumnus and donor, only joined the Zoom to understand how Adams, quote, was thinking about the Columbia protests, end quote. Yeah, of course, that's important to understand what he's thinking. Um, the evening after the call, Sit shared the Act Blue link for donations to Adams' 2025 campaign. So again, just sharing an Act Blue link for Eric Adams in a chat group with uh, over a dozen billionaires and a bunch of other rich people. The chat does not record who donated money to Adams nor how much. The New York City Campaign Finance Board website shows donations sent only up to January of this year. More recent donations will not become public until July. So just remember that, folks. In July, we will have some more information on some of the folks who gave. Pitta, the Adams campaign lawyer, said the campaign had not received donations from Lebetsky, Loeb, Sit, or Gabay. He confirmed Blavatnik had donated, but did not respond to questions asking about the timing of Blavatnik's donation. A day after the April 26th Zoom with Adams, Loeb wrote the chat group to share reflections on what had transpired during the call. He wrote that it was, quote, a sad state that we feel the need to grovel to ask our elected officials to do their jobs, he added. I'll be grateful when the perpetrators are dragged off campus, end quote. Police returned to Columbia on April 30th, arresting dozens of demonstrators who had occupied. So again, just timing wise, just important to remember. I think the Adams call was the 27th, right? So this is 3 days later. They also talked about having to lobby the board of trustees and Shafiq, et cetera, right? So, that's kind of the timeline. April 30th, arresting dozens of demonstrators who had occupied a university building. Again, that's Hins Hall. Columbia President Shafiq had requested law enforcement's aid in a letter, writing that the takeover of Hamilton Hall raised, quote, serious safety concerns, end quote. She asked police to remain on campus at least through May 17th. The morning afterward, Adams gave a news conference summarizing the action. Quote, we went in and conducted an operation, end quote. He said, to, quote, remove those who have turned the peaceful protests into a place where anti-Semitism and anti-Israel attitudes were pervasive, end quote. In early May, 7 months since its inception, the chat was shut down. A person close to Sternlicht said he decided to shutter the group because the activities were moving beyond the initial objectives, and the people who started it, including himself, were no longer actively participating and hadn't been for months. Hadn't been for months. Literally, this is probably a week after, right? They work with Adams to in Columbia to shut down the encampment at Columbia. But I'll come back to that in a sec. Quote, we are incredibly grateful for the dialogue and support this group has provided over the last 7 months, end quote, wrote a staffer for Sternlicht. The staffer wrote that members should not hesitate to reach out if they needed anything. Quote, we are stronger together, end quote, the staffer wrote in closing. I think that was Hillary's campaign slogan. All right. That's the end of the article. So I do have to hop off in a minute because I just went live for this, but I do actually have to go to my other job. But uh, what I wanted to say in closing, right, is obviously the timing of it being shut down. My guess is, right, that they got word that the Washington Post was working on an article because they said it was shut down in early May, right? It's May 17th now. It came out last night, May 16th. Takes this kind of reporting would take a while to put together, right? It's not something that you're just gonna, you know, do in a day or two. I'm sure they at least were working on this for a week, right? So early May, and maybe they got word that some of the people involved, maybe they had to fire somebody because they became uncomfortable with it and were worried that they were going to talk, whatever the case, right? But also that point about they're dissolving it, right? Because let me go back to the quote. Um, the activities were moving beyond the initial objectives, and the people who started it, including myself, were no longer actively participating and hadn't been for months. I mean, one that just sounds like a message to distance yourself. But also, they created these organs, right? They created these groups, which again, I don't have time to go into it today, but there's a lot of links in the actual article that I encourage people to check out that check out that show the groups that have been created, which again can do this propaganda purpose without a WhatsApp group, right? Um, right. So, question. So I'm gonna go here. Uh, so what's the goal in publishing this? So I said something quickly about this at the top. I know folks probably weren't all here at that point. I think that's a good question, right? My sense. This is just I can only speculate on that, right? But I think again, it is going to feed into conspiracism. You have a WhatsApp group of 100 prominent folks, including billionaires. Most of these billionaires appear to be Jewish, pro Zion. Obviously, they're all pro Zionist, right? Um, and so my feeling is that this is something that's starting to happen as, the US government is seeking for ways to distance itself from some of the things, right? Whether it's the police violence that's on campus, um, whether it's the propaganda, right? And so now how do you manage that? Well, like let's put it off on this cabal of like Zionist billionaires, right? And I think there's two aspects of that. One, this group exists, right? And it did these things and the reporting is there, right? So again, I look at this as a state counterinsurgency effort, right? As these folks coordinating between the United States, between public officials with media, um, showing propaganda films, starting up nonprofits to fund, disinformation campaigns, in favor of the war to try to win this psychological or narrative war against the Palestinian resistance, right? And in support, obviously, of genocide, right? So that's one aspect of it. And this actually occurred, and these are more or less. I mean, these are members of the ruling class. They're also coordinating with state actors, etc. Right? Um, but from like a post perspective, right, or a state perspective, right? It might be better for them to say, yeah, there's 100 there's this group of 100 billionaires, a bunch of them are Jewish, right? This feeds it's certainly going to feed right wing, conspiracy folks, right? Anti-Semitic folks. Um Say they're the ones to blame for all of this. Like, it's not the Washington Post, it's not the New York Times. We were trying our best to do credible reporting, right? And then there's this small group that's, doing these psychological operations and stuff. It's not us, right? Which again gets away from, go back and watch the most recent conversation with Max Isle. It gets away from the material underpinnings of Zionism and imperialism, right? Um, and it seeks to offload it on this group of nefarious actors when in fact like these things are, they're coordinated, right? So I do look at that still as a positive development in that it demonstrates to me that the Washington Post at least acknowledge or understands that they're losing the narrative war, right? We think about a few months ago, they were writing hit pieces on electronic intifada, right? So again, like this is a horrible outlet. I do not endorse the Washington Post. But as I said up front, they have resources for this kind of reporting, which a lot of outlets do not. And they had access to be able to get these things, right? And I'm grateful that the piece is out. So anyway, that's I'll just leave it there for now. Obviously, it's a part of an overall counterinsurgency effort. We should certainly see the ruling class, Zionism, imperialism, and our government as like thoroughly intertwined at a material level and also at a level of like the aspirations and everything else. Um, but nonetheless, and also it's going to be Adams. This is definitely throwing Eric Adams under the bus too, right? And so anyway, that's all I kind of wanted to say. Maybe we can go into it more at another discussion. Maybe I think we'll have Laura Shihai back next week, so maybe we can talk a little bit about that as well. But definitely want to say it is not. my analysis of it is not that, oh, it's just this nefarious group of 100 people, right? But the activities of this group are something that we should be aware of, and we should, seek to, how can we have these conversations to politicize or people around points like this without falling into this idea that, like, oh yeah, it's just this WhatsApp group of 100, Zionist Jewish billionaires, because that's not it at all. But anyway, appreciate y'all. I do have to run. We'll be back with more next week.